Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Rochelle from Rochelle.Handmade.Designs, and in this video we are doing part 2 of that breast cancer survivor's jacket utilizing 6035. Now before we get started, go ahead and hit the like button and the subscribe button, and also turn on the notification bell so you are notified every time I upload a new video. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get right on into this tutorial. However, we will be covering the under collar, upper collar, the facing, the sleeves, and adding on our buttonhole. So are you ready? Because I'm ready. So let's go. All right. Now, what you want to do with your under collar, let's grab the instructions and see what it says. So now we are on step number 8. It says apply interfacing, which we already did, to under collar. Stitch center back seams of under collar, and then you're going to press the seams open. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that now. So this is step number 8. So your center back seams is right here where you have those 3 notches. You're going to pin. So you're going to pin at the notch, pin at the bottom and at the top. And then using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, you're going to back stitch at the beginning and at the end, and then press your seam open. Go ahead and do that now. All right, so I went ahead with right sides together. I went ahead and stitched my under collar together. So this is what my under collar is looking like. So let's grab our instructions. We are now on step number 9. So now it says with right sides together, you're going to pin your under collar to your front neck edge, matching large and small dots, stitch between large and small dots, clip front to large dot, and then layer your seams. Okay, so go ahead and grab your jacket. And what you want to do is with right sides together, you're going to pin. Now, one thing I want to mention is make sure that your under collar is up this way, where you have that nice, lovely smile looking line right up here at the top. And you're going to pin your center back seam in between the seams where you have those notches. So you have a notch right here. You're going to match that up. See that? So you're going to match that up. You're going to match the other one up on the other side. And pin. Now, one thing that it did say in the instruction was to clip to the front large dot. So if you remember at the very front, right here where you made your stay stitching, let me bring that up so you can see. There is a dot right here. You want to clip to that dot. Now don't clip through your stitching, so I'm just going to make a little slit about right there. I'm going to do that to the other side the same way. You don't want to go too far in, but you just want to make just a little split, okay? At both of those. Now, the first dot on your under collar is going to match up with your shoulder seam. So this dot goes to your shoulder seam, and you're going to pin, making sure that your seams for your jacket is facing the back of your garment, okay? This dot right here matches up to where you made your split. So that dot right there where you made the split, that's where it goes. So you're going to pin right there where you had your split. That's why I said do not clip too far into that split area where you were supposed to reinforce. Now I'm just going to pin in a couple of places to hold it on the right hand side. So I'm just going to pin this portion right now. All right, after I do that, I'm going to go to the other side and do the exact same thing, making sure this dot right here matches up to my shoulder seam, and making sure that my shoulder seam is pressed towards the back of my jacket, and I'm going to pin. I'm also going to pin right here. That dot matches up to that slit where you made that slit, so make sure you pin there. And then pin in between the dots. All right. Now, the next thing that you want to do is if you look right here, you have 2 dots right here, okay? Those 2 dots matches up with the dots right here where you have kind of like a dart, okay? So you have a little knot right there. You want to match that dot up with that dot and pin. So you're gonna have a little notch right here, right? You want to pin at that notch. And then this dot matches up with this dot. You probably can't see it on mine, but I can. And you want to pin right there at that dot. You want to do the same thing to the other side. So now what you're going to do, this is how your jacket should look, okay? When you pin your undercollar to your jacket. So now what you're going to do is, starting at the center back, you're going to back stitch at the beginning. So all the way to this dot right here where the reinforcement is. Keep your needle down, but you're going to pivot. So with your presser foot up, you're going to pivot, and then so from this dot to this dot. And you're going to back stitch at the beginning at the center back, and then you're going to back stitch at the end. Do not go past this dot. Once you do that, you're going to flip your jacket over like this, and you're going to do the same thing. Starting at the back, you're going to back stitch at the beginning, so all the way to this dot right here. With your needle down and put your presser foot up, you're going to pivot and then sew all the way to this last dot. Back stitch at the dot. Do not go past this dot, okay? So go ahead to the sewing machine and do that now. All right, so now that I went ahead and attached my undercollar to my jacket, let's go ahead and grab our instructions to tell you the next part. So now we are at number 10. Now on number 9, they just wanted you to do the front portion right here. If you look right here, they just wanted you to do the front portion. I did the entire portion, but so now I'm going to show you number 10 is where you put in your dart in the front of your jacket. So I'm going to read it and then do it. To stitch remaining neck edge and make dart in front on inside with right sides together, bring stitching lines together, matching centers back in small dots, placing inner small dots at shoulder seam, stitch each side from center back to point of dart along stitching line. All right, so you may not realize what that means, so I'm just going to show you. All right, so with right sides together, you're going to make your dart. Now, if you look on the inside, you may not have transfer your dots or your marking for that dart that you see right here, okay? So you may not have transferred your dot. So there's the dot right here of your dart, and then you have 2 dots right up here, okay? So if you did not make your marking, go ahead and grab your pattern piece. Pattern piece number 1, okay? Match up your pattern piece, okay? And then go ahead and make your dot. Make your dot. So what you want to do is put your pattern piece down, make your dot. You have a dot there and then 2 dots up there for your dart, okay? Once you do that, you can go ahead and make your dart. And how you're going to make your dart is with right sides together. It's like making a dart for a bus dart. It's no different, right? So you're gonna match up those 2 dots. So I have a dot there and a dot there. Match them up. And I'm going to pin, okay? Now, if you cannot see your chalk line, make sure you have your chalk lines, okay? So I could kind of see mine, but I'm gonna make mine a little darker so you're able to see where my lines meet up for my dart, okay? So my dart line is right here. So I'm gonna use this blue chalk so you're able to see. So one of my dots are right here, and I'm just gonna darken it with the blue. And then the other dart line is right here. So from that point, I'm gonna match up that other dot right there. So this is my dart right here. 2 dots here, 1 dot there. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring the 2 dots together at the top and pin. Okay? And then right here at this bottom portion where the dot is right here, which is the end of your dart, I'm going to pin there. But then I'm going to make sure that the line on the back of the dart meets up with the line on the front of the dart like this. And I'm going to pin. And I'm going to do that in the center as well. So put your pin through on that line, look in the back, see if it matches. If not, you're going to have to kind of play around with it to make sure that the line in the front match up with the line in the back, and then pin. Now, what you're going to do is go to your sewing machine and starting at this dot, okay? You have a dot right there. You're going to start at the dot, but you're going to have it turned in like this. You're going to start at that dot, back stitch at the beginning, and then when you get to the end of your dart right here, do not back stitch. Just pull some thread and tie it off. So go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I went ahead and made my dart, which is right here in the front, it looks like this. I hope you can see that pretty good right here. I went ahead and pressed my seam towards the back of my jacket instead of to the front. So you need to press your seam towards the back of your jacket, okay? Now that you have done that, let's see what our next steps are. So go ahead and grab your instructions. And we are on number 11. It says apply interfacing to front and back facing sections. If you have not done that already, you need to go ahead and apply interfacing to all the remaining of your pieces that I told you when we went over what to interface the pattern pieces. So go ahead and do that if you have not done so already. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is reinforce large and small dots of front facing, stay stitch neck edge of back facing, stitch facing sections together at shoulder seam, and then we're going to edge finish the inner edges of the front facing and lower edge of back facing. Clip front facing at large dots, small dots, and back neck facing to stay stitching. All right, that's a lot, so we're going to take it in little steps. So the first thing you want to do is move your jacket out of the way and grab your facing pieces. So grab pattern piece number 7 and 8, your front and your back facing, okay? So we're going to work with pattern piece number 7 first, which is your front facing. Now, the first thing that it tells you to do is reinforce the large and small dots of your front facing. Now, you probably cannot see this on mine, so I'm just going to take a white chalk and mark where that is. They are talking about the 2 dots right here and right here. Okay, so I can see mine with my blue disappearing ink marker, but so it can show up pretty much on camera. It looks like that. Okay. Now what we're going to do is we're going to stay stitch in between those 2 dots, okay? So using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, you want to back stitch you don't necessarily have to back stitch. I will not be back stitching, but I'm going to reinforce in between these 2 dots. So go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I have reinforced in between those 2 dots, go ahead and move this off to the side and grab pattern piece number 8, which is your back facing, okay? So the next sentence tells you to stay stitch the neck area of your back facing. So basically what you need to do is start at the center back, and using a 1/2 inch seam allowance, you're gonna stay stitch to one side and then stop, flip it over, and starting back at the center back, stay stitch the opposite direction. So go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I went ahead and stay stitched the neck area of my back facing, the next step that it tells you to do, the next sentence, is to stitch the facing sections together at your shoulder seam. So go ahead and grab pattern piece number 7, which is your front facing, and with right sides together, you want to pin at your shoulder seams. So what you want to do is make sure you match up the notches right here. You have a notch. Make sure you match up that notch. Pin at both ends, your front and your back edge, and then pin across the shoulder seams on both sides. So go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I have my front facing pinned to my back facing using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, you're gonna back stitch at the beginning and at the end and press your seams open. So go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I attach the front to the back at shoulders, I'm gonna turn it over so you can see it. All right, so I attach the front to the back at shoulders. This is the right side. And this is the wrong side. So I attached it at the shoulders and pressed the seams open, okay? That's where we're at. Now, the next step says to edge finish the inner edge of your front facing and the lower edge of your back facing. So this curved edge on the front right here is what they're asking you to finish off. Now, you have a couple of ways to finish. Now, I will be finishing mine with my serger, but what you can do is if you do not have a serger, you can press in 1/4 of an inch and then press in again 1/4 of an inch, meeting that crease, okay? So you can do that, do a double fold and then stitch on the right side and stitch it in place. Like I said, I will be using my serger, so go ahead and finish off this edge right here on both sides, as well as the bottom edge of your back facing. So go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I have finished off my front facing and my back facing, the next thing that it wants us to do is clip the front facing at large dot and small dot and back neck facing to your stay stitching. So what that means is these 2 dots right here, we're going to slash into this, but you're not going to snip all the way to the dot. You're just gonna snip right here just a little bit. And then I'm gonna do the small dot right here. And then I'm gonna also do the other side. All right, so now that I have done that, I'm going to clip my back neck edge to the stay stitching, but not through my stay stitching, just like this. All right, so let's grab our instructions again. And now we are on step 12. It says, apply interfacing to upper collar with right sides together, pin upper collar to neck edge of facing, matching center back, small and large dots, and placing remaining small dots at shoulder seam, stitch back large dots and layer seams. All right. Now you should already have your interfacing done because we did this at the very beginning. So go ahead and grab your upper collar. And I'm gonna go ahead and move this out of the way. And what you're going to do is with right sides together, we're going to pin the upper collar to the neck edge of the facing, matching the center back. So you have 2 notches right here, and you're gonna match that up to the center back, to the back seam. So you match that notch up and pin. Go ahead and match the other one up as well. And then you have small dots, okay? So go ahead and put a pin in the center back. And then you have the small dots. So those small dots match up to your shoulder seams. So you're going to match the dot to the shoulder seam and pin. And do that on the other side as well. And if you need more pins, you can put it in between as well, like I do. I use more pins for that reason. And go ahead and pin the other dot at the other shoulder seam. And I'm gonna pin one more time right here. Alright, so the instructions tell you to stitch between the large dots and then layer your seams. Now because you need to go ahead and stitch all the way around that facing area. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and pin at that dot where the clipping, where the reinforcement stitch is. I'm going to pin there as well. But first I need to grab my pattern piece because I can see the dot and you probably cannot see that dot. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and pin here because these two dots match up with those two. So what I'm going to do is pin right there at the clipping, which you probably cannot see that dot. So let me grab my pattern piece. And I'm going to go ahead and make a dot right there so you can see it. Now that I made my dot, I'm going to go ahead and pin right there where the other dot is at that reinforcement stitch. And I'm going to pin there. And then I'm going to make put a couple of pins in between just to keep it all together, of course. And I'm going to do the other side the exact same way. I'm going to take my pattern piece, go ahead and place that dot. Once I get my pattern piece correct. And then I'm going to match that dot up with that reinforcement stitch. Just like so. And you're gonna pin. Now, I'm gonna place another pin in between to keep it all together, but you don't have to if you don't want to. Alright, now going to the sewing machine using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. You're going to back stitch at the beginning and at the end. Now one thing I want to do, it doesn't show that in the instructions, is I'm going to go ahead and attach that front facing area piece. So there's a notch right there, so you're going to match up those notches right there and pin. And then match up that dot to this dot right here and then pin there as well. Now this is in the second portion of your instructions, which is, I believe it's number 14, but I'm just gonna go ahead and do this so you don't have to go back and forth to the sewing machine as well, but you're gonna match up the other notches and pin, and then match up that other dot as well to that dot right there, and you're going to pin there as well. And then if you need additional pins, you can pin in between if you would like I'm doing. And that dot will match up with this dot right here. And you're going to go ahead and pin there as well. And then if you need another pin, go ahead and pin in between. You want to keep it as flat as possible, so don't be shy to use more pins. Alright, so now that I have it all pinned together, I forgot to do this side, so let's go ahead and pin that one as well at that dot, and then go ahead and pin it in between. Now that I have it all pinned together using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, what I'm going to do is go ahead and start at the center back. And using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, I'm going to back stitch at the beginning, so all the way to that dot. Stop at that dot, pivot, and then I'm going to sew to the other dot. And then once I get there, needle down, press your foot up. Same thing you do it for the front piece, and then you're going to pivot, sew to that last dot, and then back stitch. Once you do that, you're going to flip it over and do the exact same thing that you just did to that side. So flip it over, starting at the back back stitch, come to that dot, press a foot up, pivot, sew to that dot, and then pivot again, sew to that next dot, and then you're going to back stitch. Go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I have sewn my upper collar to my facing pieces, and this is what it looks like. So now the next thing that it wants us to do is, with right sides together, we're going to pin the upper collar and facing to the under collar of the garment, matching large and small dots and back and center back. And then we're going to stitch, easing in our upper collar and facing to fit, breaking stitching at large dot and layering seam. So this is what it looks like after I attach my upper collar to the facing. Okay, I layered the seams. So basically I just trimmed and layered the seams. That's what it's looking like right now. So go ahead and grab your jacket. And what we're going to do is, with right sides together, we're going to pin our upper collar and our facing to our under collar and jacket. So what we're going to do is go ahead and pin. You have a dot right here, so you want to pin there. You want to pin the back as well. Just go ahead and pin across the collar area. So go ahead and do that now. Now I want to say you want to match up these double notch right here. So pin there and then pin the rest of it across. So go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I have my upper collar pinned, so now the next thing in the instructions, we're at number 13. It says pin upper collar and facing to under collar and garment. We just did that, matching large and small dots and center back. Then we're going to stitch, easing in upper collar and facing to fit, breaking the stitching at the large dot. Now, what I want to do is, it did not tell us to sew the front portion of it, but you will need to sew the front portion of your jacket, which is the facing piece. So what we're going to do is, it just says pin upper collar and facing to under collar and garment. So what that means is, after we have pinned the collar area, we're going to pin the facing and the jacket, okay? So how you're going to do that is right here at this dot. Right there, I hope you can see that, right here. We're gonna make sure that this is matching to the dot right here, okay? You want to pin there, okay? Now the next thing we're going to do is pin, making sure this dot matches up with the dot right here on your jacket, okay? So make sure you match up those dots as well. And you're going to pin. I mean, and if you need some more pins, you can use more pins as well, because I like to use more pins to keep everything together. So I'm going to pin there and pin here as well. And then I'm going to pin all the way down the front of my facing, stopping at this dot. So go ahead and pin your facing to the front part of your jacket now. And don't forget to match up these double notches right here on the front. So go ahead and do that now. All right, so now I have it pinned on one side, okay? Now one thing I want to mention is, make sure that you have it pinned correctly. You don't want any puckers whatsoever or gathers. So I have one side pinned. Go ahead and pin the other side now. All right, so now that I have my jacket pinned all the way around, from my upper collar all the way along my front and facing, what we're going to do is, starting at the back, right here where your double notches is, using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, we're going to back stitch. Sew all the way down to this dot. Then we're going to leave our needle down, lift your presser foot, and then you're going to pivot. You're going to sew from this dot to this dot right here at the edge, right? You're going to stop. Keep your needle down and pivot. You're going to sew from this dot Once you pivot from this dot to this dot, okay? And then when you get to this dot, you're gonna leave your needle down, lift your presser foot, pivot, and then sew all the way down along the front of your jacket and your facing until you get to this dot. Once you get to this dot, you're going to back stitch, okay? Get to this dot and back stitch, all right? Once you do that, you're gonna flip your jacket over. So your jacket's going to look like this, and I'm gonna do this with you at the sewing machine. Your jacket's gonna look like this. You're gonna start right back in the center back, right here, okay? And you're going to back stitch at the beginning, so all the way to your dot. Once you get to your dot, what you're going to do is keep the needle down, lift your presser foot, and pivot. Once you pivot, you're going to stitch from this dot to this dot right here. Once you stitch to this dot, you're gonna keep your needle down, pivot, and then sew from this dot to this dot right here. Once you get to this dot, you're gonna keep your needle down, lift your presser foot, and pivot. You're gonna stitch from this dot all the way down the front until you get to this final dot right here. Then you're going to back stitch. Now I'm gonna show you this on the machine to make sure you have a clean finish on your collar and your facing, okay? So using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, back stitch at the beginning and at the end. So go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I have went ahead and put my needle down, my presser foot down, and I'm starting at the center back. So what I'm going to do is I'm using a regular length stitch at 2.5 and a regular stitch at 2.5. And what I'm gonna do is back stitch at the beginning. And I'm using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. So I'm going to sew all the way to this dot using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I'm at this dot, I'm gonna raise my presser foot and pivot, okay? And when I pivot, I'm gonna line my fabric up with 5/8 of an inch seam allowance again, put my presser foot down, and then sew to this dot right here, okay? Being careful not to create any puckers or gathers in your jacket. So make sure that underneath your jacket is flat, okay? So sew all the way to that dot. Do not go past that dot. Once you get there, lift your presser foot up, and then you're going to pivot. So I didn't come down enough, so let me come down. All right, so now I can see my dot right here, see? And then I'm gonna lift my presser foot up, and I'm going to pivot again, okay? Now that I have pivot, I'm gonna put my presser foot down, and then I'm gonna sew to this dot right here, okay? Making sure that there is no puckers, gathers, or anything. So check your fabric as you are doing this, okay? And make sure you are still lined up with 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, which I am. Now I want to check to make sure my fabric is not bunching up underneath, okay? And I'm gonna get to this dot right here. Lift my presser foot up and pivot again. Make sure that I am lined back up with 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. And then I'm gonna sew all the way down to that bottom dot. So go ahead and do that. All right, so now what we're doing is approaching this dot right here. You will back stitch when you get to this dot right here. So you're going to sew, get to this dot right here, back stitch, and then lift your presser foot. All right. Now you're going to do the exact same thing on the other side. So what I'm going to do is turn it over, and starting back at the center back, I'm going to put my needle down, presser foot down, and using 5/8 of an inch, I'm going to back stitch and sew all the way to that dot. All right, so now that I'm at this dot, I'm going to lift my presser foot up, pivot the fabric, and I'm going to sew to this dot right here, okay? Making sure that I am lined up with 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. So put my presser foot down, sew all the way to that dot, making sure not to pass the dot, okay? You do not want to pass this dot. Once you get to that dot, presser foot up and pivot, making sure you did not cause any puckers or any gathers in your stitching. So move the fabric so you could see and you could get to different things that you want to get to. Okay, put your presser foot down, and then you're gonna sew to this dot right here. All right. Make sure you are still at 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. I have a needle right here, so I need to put my presser foot up. Okay, so I'm gonna line my fabric back at that dot. I'm gonna pivot and line up with 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. So I had a needle in mind. So I'm gonna break my thread right here. And I'm gonna go back to where that dot is and line my fabric up with 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, okay? So now that I'm lined back up, I'm gonna put my presser foot down. I'm lined back up, and I'm going to sew using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Make sure that the bottom fabric is still lined up with 5/8 of an inch seam allowance as well. And I'm gonna sew to that dot. When I get to that dot, I'm gonna lift my presser foot up, pivot one last time. Make sure I'm lined up with 5/8 of an inch seam allowance and sew to that last dot. All right, so now that I'm approaching this final dot right here, I'm gonna back stitch right there. So when I get there, I'm gonna back stitch, lift my presser foot up, and that's it. All right, so now that I went ahead and attached my under collar to my upper collar, or upper collar to under collar, and attach my facing to my front, the next thing that it tells us to do is layer the seams. That's basically trim. So what you want to do is trim around your jacket. So go ahead and do that now. When you get to the corners, you could just go ahead and clip into your corners and then trim all the way around. All right, so now that I have it trimmed all the way around my facing and my collar area, I want you to go down to the bottom where this dot is that you stopped at. What you're going to do is clip up to that dot, but do not clip through your stitching, okay? So you're just leaving a peak right here, okay? And then what I'm gonna do is trim this little piece off right here, just leaving that peak. And do that to both sides. I did it on the other side already, right here. So I'm just gonna clip up to that dot and then remove the other portion, okay? So now, grabbing my instructions, we are at number 14. It tells us to turn our facing to the inside, continuing to turn up hem along the lower edge of garment, press, open out hem. Then you're going to edge finish your raw edge of your hem, hand stitch hem in place, lift up back facing, and hand stitch neck seam allowance together, base armhole edges together. All right, so that's a lot to do. So what you're going to do first is go ahead and turn your facing right side out. So go ahead and do that now. And make sure that you poke out all your corners as well. So go ahead and do that now. All right, so this is what it looks like once you turn your facing on the right side, okay? This is what my jacket is looking like. I made sure everything is, I used my point turner and make sure all my curves is poked out and all that good stuff. Now, before I do my hem, what I'm going to do is press my jacket. But before I do that, on the inside, I want to do some stay stitching to keep my facing to the inside versus having it flip over to the outside. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do it as far as I possibly can. I'm going to make sure that my seam allowance is pressed towards my facing. And then on the right side, 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, I'm going to stitch on the facing. This is my facing, so I'm going to stitch onto the facing, making sure that seam allowance is on the facing. I'm going to do that on both sides. So go ahead and do that now. All right, so I went ahead and understitched on my upper collar, my undercollar actually. My undercollar has the understitching on it. This is my undercollar, my upper collar. I went ahead and understitched that area, right? I also understitched my facing to where my facing is staying to the inside, right here. I'm gonna try to show you that. I understitched right here on both sides of my facing, okay? So now that I have done all of that, the next thing you're going to do is go ahead and do your hem. Now, in the instructions, it tells you to hand sew your hem. Well, I'm not gonna do all that jazz, so I'm gonna show you what I am going to do to my hem. Now, this is the bottom of my jacket. What I did was I went ahead and finished off the hem of my jacket now, okay? After I do that, I went ahead and basted 5/8 of an inch seam allowance just to create a basting line, okay? For me to press up my hem. Now what I'm gonna do is go to my ironing station and I'm going to press up to that line, 5/8 of an inch seam allowance all the way along my hem line. Once I do that, I wanna make sure that everything is tucked in and it's looking nice, see? You want to pin on the right side. So I'm going to pin at that dot that's there. I'm going to pin up. Make sure I press up and pin. You're going to pin on the right side of your jacket. Now, of course, I'm going to press before I pin, but I'm just showing you this. I'm going to pin right here. And then I'm going to pin along the rest of the hem of my jacket, making sure that all your seams matches. So your side seam, your back seam, all of those seams match when you pin up as well. So just go ahead and pin the hem of your jacket in place now. All right, so now that I have my hem pinned in place, using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, I'm going to turn it on the right side and stitch from this dot all the way to the other dot on the other side. So go ahead and do that now. All right, so now I stitched my hem in place. I pressed it as well. So the next thing that you need to do is attach your neck edge together. So that seam allowance right here, you need to attach it together. So all I did was bring them together, right? And then I just stitched using 3/8 of an inch seam allowance to hold those together. So now you have that together. So after that, they want you to attach the back facing to your arm guide or armhole area, okay? So you have a dot, you're going to pin at the dot here on your back facing, pin at the dot, and then you're going to pin all the way to the other dot right here. So you're gonna pin from dot to dot, right here between this little back piece. You're gonna do it on both sides. And then you're going to go to the sewing machine and you're going to baste. So back stitch at the beginning, baste all the way to that other dot, and then back stitch at the end. Now, if you want, before you do that, you still have time after this. I'm gonna do it after I baste, between, my back facing onto my armhole, just to hold it. I'm going to include a label. So I'm gonna place my label right here, and include my label on my back facing. Now you wanna make sure that you're only sewing on your back facing. So before you do that, you wanna have it out. Just have it a single layer and attach it to just your back facing. So go ahead to the sewing machine and do that now. All right, so this is what my jacket is looking like so far. I went ahead and basted around the armhole. Basically I basted the back facing, which is this piece right here. I basted that onto my shoulder edge between the dots. So there is a dot right here, which is an X right here on mine, and the back one right here as well. So I basted that on both sides, and this is what my jacket is looking like so far. All right, and I also gave it a nice lovely press. I inserted my label on the back facing. Now, I did not sew all the way through. All I did was on the back facing, like I just explained to you. Now that your jacket is looking pretty good, you're almost done. The only thing left to do is the sleeve. So go ahead and move your jacket out of the way. All right, so go ahead and grab your sleeves. Now, like I said previously, I made a modification to my sleeve. Now, the modification that I made was to the color block my sleeves, because I ran out of the top color, okay? So that's why my sleeve is like this. Now, if you wanted to know how to do this, if you did not catch that at the beginning of this video, go ahead and go back to that portion where I explained what I did in order to create the sleeves, okay? Now I'm gonna move one of my sleeves out of the way, and go ahead and grab your instructions. So now we are on step number 15. 15 says to E-stitch top of sleeve between notches, and then stitch underarm seams. All right, so E-stitch is basically gathering stitches. So what you're going to do is at that single notch, you're gonna use the longest stitch on your machine. At the single notch, what you're going to do is back stitch at the beginning, and you're going to E-stitch all the way to that double notch, okay, on the other side. So you're gonna back stitch at the beginning, but you're not going to back stitch at the end at that double notch, okay? One thing I wanna say is, what I'm going to do, I'm gonna do at 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, and then 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, making E-stitch along the sleeve cap. After I do that, with right sides together, I'm going to pin my underarm seam. Now, because I am color blocking, I want to make sure that my seams for my color blocking is matching up. So I'm going to pin there. I'm going to pin at the top. And then I'm going to match up my notches as well and pin at the bottom. Once I do that, if you need to pin in more areas, you can. And then using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, back stitch at the beginning and at the end, and then finish off your seams. Now, before you stitch your underarm seams, right after you do the E-stitching for your hem, your sleeve cap, before you stitch your underarm seam, you want to do your hem. And the reason why I say that is because your hem will be in place once you stitch your underarm seam. So what you want to do is, now I'm just going to press 5/8 of an inch seam allowance and create a double fold versus just serging the ends of it, okay? I'm not gonna do that. So what I'm gonna do is press up 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. I'm gonna press to that line and then press up again, and then on the right side, I'm gonna sew my hem in place. So I'm gonna do that first, right after I create my E-stitching in my sleeve cap. And then I will sew my underarm seams together. So go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I went ahead and did my underarm seams of my jackets, of my sleeves, I attached my underarms. I sewn my underarm seams together. I created my gathering stitch, and then I pressed my seams towards the back of my sleeve, okay? So now what I'm going to do is grab my jacket, with right sides together, I'm going to pin at the underarm seams. So let me turn my jacket this way, okay? This is the underarm, this is the armhole. And what you're going to do is with right sides together, you're going to pin your sleeve to the underarm seam, making sure that your seam allowance is towards the back of your jacket, okay? And your sleeve seam allowance is to the back of your jacket. And then you're going to pin. You're gonna pin at your single notch, which is the front portion of your jacket, which is right here. And then you're gonna pin in between the underarm seam and the single notch. Then you want to pin your double notch right here, okay? And you're gonna pin there. And then pin in between your underarm seam and your double notch. Then you want to flip your jacket to where you can actually handle it better. So flip it to where you can see it. And then on your sleeve, you have a dot. That dot matches up to your shoulder seam, which is right here, okay? Right there, that is your shoulder seam. And you want to pin there. Now, if you did not pull up any gathers along your sleeve, you need to do that. Now, I did not pull up any gathers on mine, so I'm going to go ahead and pull up gathers now. So use the 2 threads right here, and you want to pull up your gathers. So go ahead and do that now if you have not done so. Now, you're not trying to create gathers, you're just trying to ease in your sleeve into that arm's eye area, okay? Once you do that, you want to pin your dot to your shoulder seam. And then you want to pin the front to the front portion of your sleeve. So you want to pin there. And then you want to pin all the way around your arm's eye for your sleeve. All right, so now that I have my sleeve pinned all the way around, starting at the underarm seam, using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance and a regular length stitch, you're going to back stitch at the beginning and sew all the way around and back stitch at the end. Once you do that, you're going to finish off your seam allowance. Now I'm going to just serge my seam allowance. So go to the sewing machine and do that now. All right, so now that I went ahead and sewn in my sleeve, I went ahead and used my tailoring ham and pressed along my sleeve cap. You know, press the seam towards the sleeve and press along the sleeve cap. So this is what the jacket is looking like so far. It's amazing. All right, so the last thing that you need to do, go ahead and grab your instructions. Now I am skipping steps 16 through 18. Reason being is because I'm not doing that sleeve facing because I did color block mine. I just did not color block the way that they have you do in 16 through 18, okay? So I did number 19, which is where we put our sleeve in. So number 20 says, make buttonhole in right front. Now that's the right front wearing it, so it's on your left hand side when looking at it. So we will be making our button hole on this side, okay? So right here, you're going to go to your sewing machine. Now, everyone's sewing machine is different, so I am not gonna walk you through making a buttonhole. Practice on your machine before you sew on your buttonhole to your jacket if you have never done buttonholes. So go ahead and make your buttonhole in the right front. And then what you're going to do is attach your button right here after you make your buttonhole. You can hand sew it or you can do it with the machine. Once you do that, you are all done with your jacket. Go ahead and give it a wash, and if you want, you could definitely take it to the cleaners and get it nicely pressed, or you could do it yourself. The option is up to you. But that is all for this jacket tutorial. All right, so there you have it. You have just completed your blazer utilizing New Look 6035. So don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Turn on the notification bell so you are notified every time I upload a new video. So I'll see you in the next video. And as always, keep sewing.